There was a time when One Day at a Time felt like one of the warmest shows on American television. A small apartment in Indianapolis, a divorced mother trying to raise two teenage daughters, a building superintendent who always seemed to show up at the wrong time with a tool belt, a grin, and advice nobody asked for. For millions of viewers in the 1970s and early 1980s, it was more than just another sitcom. It felt familiar. It felt honest. It felt like a family trying to survive one argument, one laugh, and one day at a time. But behind the laughter, the real lives of the cast became far more complicated than anything written into the show. One young star battled addiction while America watched her grow up. Another became one of television's most beloved faces, only to spend decades confronting pain, loss, and the cost of fame. The woman who held the family together on screen would later face a heartbreaking final chapter. And the man who made audiences laugh as Schneider would spend his later years battling illness before saying goodbye. Some cast members survived. Some disappeared from the spotlight. Some rebuilt their lives after scandal, grief, and personal struggle. And some are no longer here, except in reruns, photographs, interviews, and the memories of fans who never forgot them. Today, we look back at the cast of One Day at a Time, then and now. Who died? Who is still alive in 2026? Who faced the most painful battles after fame? And what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling on one of television's most unforgettable families? Before One Day at a Time became a memory from classic television, it was part of a much bigger change happening in America. When the series premiered in 1975, television families were beginning to look different. The perfect household, the smiling parents, the easy answers at the end of every episode, all of that was slowly giving way to stories that felt closer to real life. At the center of this show was Anne Romano, a divorced mother trying to build a new life while raising two daughters on her own. That may sound ordinary today, but in the mid-1970s, it gave millions of viewers something television had not always shown honestly. A woman starting over, making mistakes, setting boundaries, falling apart, and still showing up for her children. That is why One Day at a Time mattered. It was funny, but it was not empty. It had jokes, but it also had pressure, arguments, growing pains, and the quiet fear of not knowing what tomorrow would bring. For many American viewers, the show felt like their own living room. It captured a country where families were changing, women were demanding more independence, and young people were growing up faster than their parents expected. But the more real the show felt on screen, the more haunting the real lives behind it became. Because some of the actors who gave America comfort every week were fighting battles the audience could not see. And no story shows that more clearly than the young star who played Julie Cooper, Mackenzie Phillips. Mackenzie Phillips was only a teenager when America came to know her as Julie Cooper, the older daughter on One Day at a Time. On screen, Julie was restless, emotional, rebellious, and alive with the kind of energy every parent of a teenager recognized. She was not always easy. She pushed back. She made mistakes. She wanted freedom before she fully understood what freedom could cost. And that was part of what made her feel real. But behind the character, Mackenzie Phillips was living a story far more dangerous than any sitcom plot. She had grown up close to fame long before One Day at a Time. As the daughter of John Phillips from The Mamas and the Papas, she was surrounded by music, celebrity, and the wild culture of the 1970s from a very young age. By the time she became a television star, she was already carrying pressures most people never saw. While viewers watched Julie grow up in Anne Romano's apartment, Mackenzie was fighting addiction behind the scenes. The same show that made her famous also became part of one of the classic television's most painful after-fame stories. Her struggles affected her work, her stability, and eventually her place on the series. For fans, Julie was the troubled daughter they wanted to understand. But in real life, Mackenzie was a young woman trying to survive a storm that fame only made louder. Years later, she would speak openly about drug use, trauma, relapse, recovery, and the painful truth of growing up too fast in Hollywood. She did not hide from the darkest parts of her story. Instead, she turned them into warnings, lessons, and eventually a mission to help others facing addiction. That is what makes her story so powerful. Mackenzie Phillips is not remembered only because she fell. She is remembered because she kept getting back up. In 2026, she stands as one of the surviving faces of One Day at a Time, but her legacy reaches far beyond Julie Cooper. Her real story is about child fame, addiction, damage, honesty, and survival. And in many ways, the title of the show became the only way she could live. One Day at a Time. While Mackenzie Phillips carried the darker, more dangerous side of young fame, Valerie Bertinelli became the face many viewers wanted to protect. She was only 15 when One Day at a Time entered her life, but almost immediately, America saw her as Barbara Cooper, the younger daughter with the bright smile, quick timing, and quiet sweetness that balanced the storms around her. If Julie was restless and rebellious, Barbara felt softer, steadier, and easier for audiences to love. But growing up on television is never as simple as it looks. Valerie did not just play a teenage girl in front of America. In many ways, she became one. Viewers watched her change from a child performer into a young woman, episode by episode, season by season. That kind of fame can feel warm from the outside, but for the person living inside it, there is pressure in being loved so publicly before you fully know who you are. After One Day at a Time, Valerie's career did not disappear. She continued acting, became a familiar presence on television, wrote openly about her life, and later reached new audiences through food, daytime television, and deeply personal reflections on grief, body image, love, and loss. But her after-fame story was never only about success. There were difficult marriages, public heartbreak, private struggles, and the painful process of learning how to stop measuring herself through the eyes of others. Valerie has spoken over the years with a kind of honesty that made fans feel as if Barbara Cooper had grown up alongside them, not perfectly, not untouched by pain, but still here. And that is why her story remains so powerful. She was America's sweetheart, but she was also a real person behind that image. A teenager who became famous too young, a woman who had to rebuild her confidence in public, a survivor who kept finding new ways to begin again. In 2026, Valerie Bertinelli remains one of the most beloved surviving faces of One Day at a Time. For many fans, she is not just remembered as Barbara, she is remembered as someone they watched grow up, fall down, speak honestly, and keep moving forward. But the heart of One Day at a Time was never only its daughters. At the center of that apartment was the woman trying to hold the family together, Bonnie Franklin. Bonnie Franklin was the center of One Day at a Time. As Anne Romano, she was not the perfect television mother. That was what made her matter. She was tired, stubborn, loving, impatient, proud, afraid, and determined to build a life after divorce in a world that did not always know what to do with women starting over. In the 1970s, that image carried real weight. Anne Romano was raising two daughters alone, arguing with them, protecting them, learning from them, and sometimes losing control in ways that felt painfully human. Bonnie Franklin gave the role fire. She could make Anne funny, wounded, furious, and deeply vulnerable within the same scene. She did not simply hold the apartment together. She held the entire emotional truth of the show. Off-screen, Franklin became closely connected to the legacy of the series. To many fans, she was one of television's most memorable mothers, not because she had all the answers, but because she kept showing up when life was hard. Her final chapter was heartbreaking. Bonnie Franklin passed away in 2013 at the age of 69 after battling pancreatic cancer. But Ann Romano did not fade with her. Every time fans return to One Day at a Time, they see a woman fighting for dignity, family, independence, and survival. Bonnie Franklin gave America more than a sitcom mother. She gave them a woman who felt real. And if Ann brought the heart, the next cast member brought the laughter. Pat Harrington Jr. as Schneider. If Bonnie Franklin gave One Day at a Time its emotional center, Pat Harrington Jr. gave the show one of its most unforgettable comic rhythms. As Dwayne F. Schneider, he could walk into the Romano apartment with a tool belt, a grin, and the confidence of a man who believed he had the answer to everything. Most of the time he did not, but that was exactly why audiences loved him. Schneider was nosy, awkward, old-fashioned, and sometimes completely inappropriate. Yet Harrington played him with such warmth and timing that he became more than a punchline. He was the neighbor who would not leave, the handyman who always appeared too soon, and the lonely man beneath the comedy who quietly became part of the family. His performance was so memorable that it earned him an Emmy, confirming Schneider as one of classic television's great supporting characters. But like so many stories behind beloved sitcom faces, Pat Harrington Jr.'s final years were much quieter than the laughter he left behind. He later battled Alzheimer's disease, and after a fall and serious health complications, he passed away in 2016 at the age of 86. For fans, Schneider remains frozen in memory with his white uniform, his mustache, and that familiar entrance through the door. But behind the jokes was a real man, aging, struggling, and eventually leaving behind a character millions still remember. And beyond the main family, One Day at a Time was also shaped by the familiar faces who passed through its apartment, changed its direction, and left their own mark after fame. Beyond Anne, Julie, Barbara, and Schneider, One Day at a Time was filled with familiar faces who helped the show grow beyond one apartment and one family. Richard Mazer appeared early as David Kane, Anne's lawyer and possible love interest. His time on the series was brief but important. David represented the life Anne might have chosen if she had been ready to trust love again. But the show moved in another direction, and Mazer went on to build a long career as one of television and film's most dependable character actors. Michael Lembeck brought a different kind of energy as Max Horvath, Julie's husband. His role was tied closely to Mackenzie Phillips's story, but his own after-fame path became one of reinvention. Instead of staying only in front of the camera, Lembeck moved behind it and became a successful director, proving that some actors survive Hollywood by changing where they stand. Then came Glenn Scarpelli as Alex Handress, the young boy who entered Anne's life after loss and gave the later seasons a new emotional shape. His presence reminded viewers that families do not always stay the same. Sometimes they grow through grief, change, and unexpected responsibility. Shelley Fabre and Nanette Fabre also brought deeper television history into the series, connecting One Day at a Time to earlier generations of American entertainment. Not every cast member carried the same headline, but together, these faces helped turn the show into something larger than a sitcom. They made it feel like a living world, and by 2026, that world had become a mixture of survivors, memories, and empty spaces where beloved faces used to be. By 2026, the cast of One Day at a Time is no longer something fans can imagine as a simple reunion photo. It is a story of survivors, final goodbyes, and the strange way television keeps people young long after real life has moved on. Valerie Bertinelli is still alive in 2026, now 66, and remains one of the most recognizable and beloved faces from the series. Mackenzie Phillips is also 66, still carrying a story of addiction, recovery, and survival that has become inseparable from her name. Glenn Scarpelli, who joined the later years as Alex, is still alive as well, now 59. Michael Lembeck, remembered as Max Horvath, is 77 and built a strong second career behind the camera. Richard Mazur, the early love interest David Kane, is also among the surviving cast, along with Shelley Fabares and other familiar faces from the show's extended world. But the empty spaces are just as powerful. Bonnie Franklin died in 2013. Pat Harrington Jr. died in 2016. Nanette Fabre, who brought even deeper classic television history to the series, died in 2018. So, when fans ask who is still alive from One Day at a Time, the answer is not just a list of names. It is a reminder that the show's title became part of its truth. Everyone kept going the only way life allows. One Day at a Time. The story of One Day at a Time is not only about who died, who survived, or who disappeared from the spotlight. It is about what fame does to people after America stops watching every week. On screen, the show was about a family trying to get through life in small pieces. One problem, one argument, one apology, one day at a time. But off-screen, that title became almost painfully real for the people who lived behind those characters. Mackenzie Phillips had to survive addiction, public judgment, and the long road of recovery. Valerie Bertinelli had to grow up in front of millions, then learn how to separate the woman she became from the image America once loved. Bonnie Franklin gave viewers a strong television mother, but her own final chapter reminded fans that even the strongest figures are not beyond illness, age, or loss. Pat Harrington Jr. made people laugh for years, only to spend his later life facing a quieter and more fragile kind of struggle. That is the truth behind After Fame. A hit show can make someone unforgettable, but it cannot protect them from pain. It cannot freeze time. It cannot keep every cast member young, healthy, famous, or safe. And yet, that is also why their stories still matter. Because One Day at a Time was never really about perfect lives. It was about surviving imperfect ones. Looking back now, One Day at a Time is more than a classic sitcom from the 1970s. It is a time capsule of a changing America, a show about divorce, motherhood, growing up, starting over, and trying to hold a family together when life refuses to be simple. Bonnie Franklin made Anne Romano feel strong because she allowed her to be flawed. Valerie Bertinelli gave Barbara a sweetness that audiences never forgot. Mackenzie Phillips brought Julie a restless truth that became even more heartbreaking when fans learned what she was fighting in real life. Pat Harrington Jr. turned Schneider into a comic figure who somehow became part of the family. Some of them are still here in 2026. Some are gone. But the strange beauty of television is that it lets people return. Open an old episode, and there they are again, younger, louder, funnier, and alive inside the moment that made America love them. They gave viewers laughter, one episode at a time. Their real lives gave fans something deeper to remember. Fame fades. People change. Some stories end too soon. But the characters we loved can stay with us for a lifetime. Which One Day at a Time cast member do you remember most? And whose After Fame story surprised you the most?